Great, thank you. First of all, I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be here. I've never been to Poland before, but I've heard a lot from developers that I've met all over the world, and this trip has been amazing. It has not disappointed at all. I really admire the spirit of developers here. A couple of quick notes. I've been told that I tend to speak very quickly, so if that happens and you guys are having a hard time, please just raise your hand or make a note. We'll have some time at the end to ask questions. Unfortunately, the translator from last night is not here. I thought he was amazing. I wish I could have someone like that take notes for me. But anyway, one of the things I really like to do during a talk is just to kind of get a sense of the audience. So with that, is everyone here a mobile game developer or a game developer in general? Is there anyone here that's not a game developer? Okay. And for those guys that developers in the room, how many people have actually launched a mobile game in Asia before? Okay, cool. Okay, so good to know. Why don't we get started? So just a quick slide about Six Waves and myself, so you know where we're coming from. Six Waves basically pioneered free-to-play publishing. So back in the days when social gaming was really hot on Facebook, we were actually the largest publisher of Facebook games. So we basically pioneered that, and since then we've successfully transitioned to mobile publishing. So for the last few years, we've been very focused in Asia, where we're headquartered, and then slowly but surely expanding our coverage to other parts of the world. So initially we did a lot of casual games, and nowadays we're definitely more towards mid-core strategy and RPGs. So that's kind of what we're about. With that, let's talk about mobile. So you guys all know mobile gaming is massive, but not sure you know exactly how big it is. So this is the PC gaming market. Over the last year, mobile actually surpassed PC for the first time ever. So mobile gaming is now bigger than PC gaming as well as console gaming. So if you guys are developing mobile games, that's really exciting news. We're in the right space. Even more encouraging is the fact that mobile continues to grow. So this is from our friends at Sensor Tower, sort of showing the year-on-year growth from Q1 this year compared to Q1 last year. So mobile gaming is great. It's growing. It's all good, right? That's what we're all here for, right? The answer is no. So let's look a little bit closer. There's a couple of things that I'd like to really highlight. So this is a sort of a quick snapshot of the top mobile games in 2015. So this is combined revenue from iOS and Android, and I'm sure you guys recognize pretty much most of the games that appear here. So what happened between 2015 and 2016, we lost a couple of the games that were at the bottom of the top 10. So those kind of dropped out. The rest of these games just kind of shifted around a little bit. So looking at 2016, we have some new entries, Clash Royale and Mobile Strike, but those are from existing players already in the market. The only other two that cracked the top 10, one is Pokemon Go, obviously. That is a huge outlier, but as you guys know, connected to a huge IP. So it's quite a phenomenon, and that's going to be very difficult for anyone to replicate. And then the final one is a game called Fate Grand Order, which is also based on a Japanese IP. It is not a new game. It's been in the market for about 2 years now and managed to climb into the charts for some reasons, which I'll get into a little bit later. So what does this mean? Just looking at it, basically there's not a whole lot of movement at the top of the charts. And basically, if you're looking at the US alone, the top 5 grossing mobile games made up close to 30% of all the revenue. So the big players are really eating up a lot of the lion's share of the pie. So basically, the challenge is, you guys all know that it's very expensive to do marketing and user acquisition. That trend is not going to change anytime soon. So we have rising UA costs. We have very competitive, saturated markets. So the largest companies have the most infrastructure, they have the biggest budgets, and they can basically outspend the competition and sort of maintain their chart position. So basically, that has created a sort of class of haves and have-nots. So the bigger players really have are going to be difficult to move and budge from the market. So even for established, let's say mid-tier or indie developers, we just cannot compete in terms of marketing spend. It's just not a feasible business. So what does that mean for us? So basically, we need all the help we can get. So what I've tried to do today is sort of capture some things that we can do to approach the mobile market that are hopefully low cost as well, and help sort of maybe give you some competitive advantages to compete in this really, really crowded space. So here are the sort of top 5 in my book. First of all, understanding global markets. So the most common question that I get is, hey, Stephen, where are you from? So Six Ways is a Hong Kong company. I technically come from Hong Kong, but I'm actually American. I was born in the US. I just moved to Hong Kong for business. But my family comes from another part of the world. So what I'm trying to show is that there's a lot of global perspectives, and we all come from different parts of the world, and we have different experiences and perspectives. So I'll try to relate some experiences from working in an Asian company, and hopefully tie that into mobile as well. So first of all, why Asia? Should be fairly obvious, but mobile gaming revenue in Asia is greater than the rest of the world combined. It's been like this for a few years already. Not only that, but it's actually the fastest growing region for mobile games too. So there's a lot of buzz about Asia, and hopefully I can help you guys to better understand that. So most of the time people ask, Stephen, can you guys help with the Asian market? And that's a very, very complex term. And most people tend to think of the Asian market as sort of these big 3, so China, Japan, and Korea, South Korea, not North Korea. So basically, but in reality, in addition to these 3, it's actually billions of people in the Asian market, dozens of countries, hundreds of different languages, and each one of those is very, very culturally unique. So I'll break this down a little bit. So let's just start with China. A lot of people ask me about China. Long story short, it's really, really tough. I'm sure you guys have read some of the articles about the new regulations in China and how that's really difficult. So China is actually really, really challenging. This is one of a slide I like to show to give you a little bit more perspective. So imagine you've launched your game in China eventually. This is sort of the potential revenue that you can achieve from your mobile game, right? So you've got 100% revenue. Right off the bat, you have to take 30% off of that for the 3 large mobile carriers, because carrier billing is critical in China. If you don't have carrier billing, people are not going to be able to pay and spend money for your game. So 30% right off the top. In addition to that, I'm sure you guys know that there is no Google Play in China, so that creates a lot of fragmentation. There's literally hundreds of Android marketplaces. These marketplaces all kind of operate differently. You have to spend a lot of time to negotiate with them and sort of follow their regulations. In general, they take around 40% rev share as well. So in theory, that leaves a developer and a publisher to split the remaining 30%. In reality, it's closer to around 12% each, because you've got sort of transaction issues. So people didn't receive money due to infrastructure fraud, SIM tampering, this kind of thing. So a lot of this burden falls on the developer, and because of that, you really, you hear a lot of stories about, hey, we got huge downloads in China. That's very easy to achieve given the population of mainland China, but you don't really hear a lot of people talking about how much revenue they were able to get out of China, and this is one of the key reasons why. So mainland China is really, really difficult, but if we break down the Chinese market, there's actually a lot more to it. So obviously China is the biggest part of Asia, but even if you exclude China, the rest of Asia is actually larger than North America. The rest of Asia is also bigger than Europe, Latin America, Middle East combined. So there's a lot more to it, and even if you look at the Chinese market, there is also 2 other countries called Taiwan and Hong Kong. So it's very, very common for people to assume that this is the same as China, because we're all Chinese people technically. In reality, it's very different. So you guys know that in China we have iOS App Store, but we do not have Google Play. But if you wanted to launch your game on iOS in China, there's a long approval process. It's pretty regulated. There's some things that you cannot do in mainland China. But meanwhile, in Taiwan and Hong Kong, you have properly run iOS and Android stores, and they operate just like you would expect they would in the other parts of the world. So just to give you a little bit more perspective about Taiwan and Hong Kong, these are actually very, very small markets. So relative to the size of Poland, they're actually quite tiny. But in reality, it's a really, really unique market. Actually, both of those are very, very unique. So just some examples. Actually, anyone here been to Hong Kong before? Okay, good. I saw a few of you. So this is a pretty common scene in Hong Kong. This is the subway. Everyone's on their phone. It's just a way to escape sort of the pace of everyday life, and it's pretty common to see everyone with their heads down, even when they're walking on the sidewalk. It drives me crazy, but people are really, really crazy about their mobile phones. Um, in fact, there's 240% mobile penetration in Hong Kong. This is one of my favorites to show. I didn't take this one, but this is a taxi driver in Hong Kong, and he has just a ridiculous amount of devices. So he's got, full-on smartphone, old school feature phone. This is not an exaggeration. I mean, it's very common to see this. Okay, so why does this matter? This is a ranking of the top countries in terms of Google Play revenue. So obviously China is not there, but as you can see, Taiwan and Hong Kong, which are really, really small markets, they're actually top 10 globally. So Taiwan is on par with Germany. Hong Kong, with a population of 7 million people, is doing better than Canada in terms of Google Play revenue. And interestingly enough, as a former British colony, English is an official language of Hong Kong. So I would submit that Hong Kong is actually a really good gateway if you're looking to Asia to test how your game will respond with Chinese players. All right, so basically, what can we do for that in terms of global markets? First of all, talk to the experts. So if you're looking to launch your game in Latin America, find someone in that territory who knows the market well. Same goes for Asia. It helps you, provides more focus. So find out where your game has the most potential. So when developers talk to us, we actually have each of our country managers weigh in and say, okay, yes, I like this game a lot for my country, or no, or maybe somewhere in between. So not only will you have a better idea of where your games will have potential, but you also learn what works and what they're looking for in each market, and you can keep that in mind for the future. All right, and obviously because you can't launch everywhere, you have to kind of figure out, where your game has potential, and then prioritize your work to figure out, okay, where should I launch, or where should I put resources into to give me the best return. All right, so the second point, fairly obvious one as well, is localization. So you guys all know it pays to translate games into other languages. So do we have any classic retro gamers people played? Do you guys play any games in the 80s before or 90s? Okay. Okay, good. So these are some of the more famous, in my mind, cases of, I would say, bad localization. This one you guys are very familiar with from Zero Wing. So you could argue it's good because it kind of created this cultural meme, but I would say it's pretty bad. For me, this one drove me crazy when I was a kid because in Japan they did a really bad job of translating this, and Street Fighter players, there was a rumor going around that there's a character called Cheng Long. It's actually not any character, and players spent a ton of time and a ton of quarters actually trying to discover this character that didn't exist. So localization is really, really important, and it's important to get it right. So I'll show you what I mean. So bringing it back to the Chinese market, each one of these countries is very, very unique in terms of mobile behavior and cultural sort of relevance. So just as an example, in terms of mobile messaging, you guys all know WeChat is a phenomenon in mainland China. But in Taiwan, for some reason, Line is the most popular messaging platform. In Hong Kong, it's more like the rest of the world. We use WhatsApp. In terms of written language, mainland China uses what we call simplified Chinese, which is sort of less strokes, whereas Taiwan and Hong Kong use more traditional characters. Now, this is the really confusing part. In terms of spoken language, we speak Mandarin Chinese in mainland China and also in Taiwan, but it sounds different. There's different accents, there's kind of different cultural slang. And then Hong Kong speaks Cantonese, which is totally different. So it's really hard to keep track. Excuse me. So because of that, though, it's challenging. A lot of people ask, hey, I have a Chinese, I'm thinking about localizing my game into a Chinese version. The first thing I ask them is, which Chinese are you talking about? What market are you looking to launch a game in? So it's very important to be aware of that. Speaking specifically about Cantonese, one of the opportunities is that we saw when we first got into mobile sort of market, we actually developed a really simple quiz sort of trivia app. It's called Emoji Pop. This was back maybe 5 years ago. What we did was we actually created the question sets completely in Cantonese, so using the local slang, cultural references that only Cantonese people would know. And because of that, it went straight to #1 in Hong Kong with 0 promotion. Excuse me. So So basically what that means is if you make something very, very specific to a territory, local players will respond very, very well to that because chances are the localization for that language has not been done properly or it hasn't been done to a really deep degree which will resonate with players. So a good piece of advice is basically to, if for developers here in Poland, if you make the game really, really Polish, I would argue that you have a really, really good chance to make it succeed locally. So, I mean, the mistake that a lot of people make when they talk about China is they say, it's all the same. Chinese is the same. It's kind of like saying people from Poland are the same as Russians, or it's like completely wrong. All right. So, just want to sort of make sure you guys understand that. So, um, a more recent example. So, Pokemon. This is how the word Pokemon is translated in each of the markets. I think the funniest one is the Taiwanese one, which literally is translated into magic babies. Um, so why am I bringing this up? More recently, when Nintendo launched Pokemon Sun and Moon last year, they actually changed the name of Pikachu, and they changed it to try to make it sort of standardized for Chinese players. It didn't really work out. This is a protest in Hong Kong, so people were really fired up about it. I mean, they grew up playing Pokemon in the 90s, calling it one thing, and now it's called something else. And there was like all these petitions to Nintendo. They didn't really like it. Pikachu is not happy. So again, like it really pays to know the markets that you're launching in. Um, Another example. So this is a Korean game that we worked with a few years ago. It's an RPG, and you've got cards, and basically you're sort of setting your deck right now. And confirmation screen kind of pops up. Anyone want to take a guess whether or not it's A or B? Anyone? The correct answer is B. Yeah, so if you're not aware of these specific cultural idiosyncrasies, you run the risk of basically pissing off your players, right? Because they spend a lot of time setting up and then you just cancel. And that's an example of how it really pays to talk to regional experts so you understand what local players expect. All right, and so it's not just about localizing the text or the audio. It's kind of getting really deeper with the culturalization. One more example, which I'll share. This is a game which we launched with Game Insight. It's called Airport City. This is sort of the original NPCs. And then when we relaunched it in Asia, we basically revamped those characters. As you can see, they're kind of the same people, but very, very different. They've got bigger eyes. The ladies have a slit in the dress for some reason. Anyway, so there's a lot of ways that you can work with partners or regional experts to make your game more palatable for local players. Because if all things are being equal, a local player will play something that resonates more in their local language. So just to sum up in terms of localization, plan with localization in mind from day one. Don't hard code the text or the images. Make it easy to swap out for more appropriate content. Start on your home turf if you can. That's what we did when we shifted to mobile because our rationale is if we couldn't do it in Hong Kong, we can't do it anywhere else. So nobody knows your home territory better than you do. And then I would say think beyond the text, right? So keep in mind there's a lot of really, really low-cost ways to localize as well. So we've used interns, friends and family, testers that have volunteered. There's a lot of ways to get people involved in this process. I would say, but be aware that they have to really know the content. So if you're getting someone to localize a casino game and they never played before, they may not use the correct terminology, for example. So they have to be knowledgeable about the type of game and also enthusiastic, and that will really show in sort of what they produce. And finally, make it resonate, as I talked about. All right, so number 3, live ops. So basically, live ops, I mean, any updates or changes once a game is live. So it could be in terms of events, items, etc. And this is probably the most common hurdle that we run into when we work with developers, is that most developers just work like crazy for launch, and everything kind of goes into launch. But what usually happens when you launch a game? You find bugs, issues come up, you're struggling to deal with that, and you're so busy trying to catch up with that you have no time to plan ahead for events. So I think it's really important to recognize that launch is not the end. In fact, it's just the beginning. So your most successful mobile games you're basically spending a lot more on live operations than you are in actually launching the game. So this is just an example for illustration purposes, but your top mobile games in Asia, you have an event happening every single day. So there's no point in which you log into a game where there's nothing happening. So it could be a monthly event, weekly event, you're overlapping it with limited time events. And this really helps people to come back to your game. So if they really like the gameplay, and they're really addicted, give them a reason to come back and get something. So I'll show you an example. One of my favorite examples of live ops done correct is a game called Puzzle and Dragons. Not sure if you guys have played it, but one of the things that they do really well is what they call collaborations, which are basically crossovers with IP. So this is an example they did with Final Fantasy. If you guys played Final Fantasy VII, these are some of the most well-known characters, and people just go absolutely nuts when this event happens. And you'll try like crazy to gacha and get your favorite characters. If you miss it, you might have to wait until next year. So basically, limited time collaborations. Also, scarcity is a really big one. So this is a strategy game that we published in Hong Kong and Japan, and this is actually the most powerful character card in the game, and you cannot actually buy this if you wanted to. So there's a limited window in which you can gacha to maybe get a chance to get him. So every time we actually make this guy available, you see a huge spike in the revenue. We try to keep that relatively scarce. But there, other than unique characters, there's a lot of ways to make events. Like so, players that really like your game, they don't need much excuse to come back to the game. You could do, an anniversary of your game, your 1 month anniversary, or we hit 1,000 players, or 5,000 players, or 1 million Facebook likes or followers, et cetera. So the really, really savvy companies in Asia, they're just using any excuse to come up with an event and get people talking about it and get people coming back to the game. So it could be public holidays, could be any excuse to sort of create an event. All right, and while you're doing that, you're also continuing to talk about this with your players through social media, through discussion apps, through influencers and promoters, and sometimes we've even recruited our top players to actually sort of share that intel of what's coming with the rest of their guild. Other thing is, other than online stuff, you can also do a lot of stuff offline. So this is just some examples of events that we've actually run for players of our strategy games. So one is actually a tournament. This was at a game show locally. So if you have an audience that really likes your game, give them a chance to come in and show you how much they like it. We give them limited edition swag, items that fit with the game, and they like to show that off. So live ops, really important. Create a regular routine. After a while, your players will know, okay, this is the weekend event, so I'm going to log in on Friday, spend a lot, and play over the weekend. So this is just a sort of example of our grossing ranks in Japan, and it's pretty much like clockwork. And the cadence is a little bit faster in Asia because players consume content faster. So, but it's not something that you cannot do for the West as well. So in terms of live ops, make sure you map out and have content ready for at least 6 to 9 months before you launch your game, because otherwise you're not going to be able to keep up. Create scarcity, as I talked about. And these events do not have to be totally different from events that you've done before. You can make a cosmetic change to an item. You can have just some random drops and just make a leaderboard and challenge people to see who can collect the most of a certain item. It can be score-based. It can be any manner of event. You can tie in current events to that as well. So something is really topical, get people talking about that, create an event. And then finally, look at collaborations and crossovers. So fourth one is actually customer care. So seems fairly obvious, but you guys know that players are really passionate. People go crazy. I mean, it still boggles my mind how people go to arenas and watch esports. I understand it, but it's not for me. But the short answer is people now have more choices than ever before, right? There's several million apps in the App Store. You have to earn their loyalty and work really hard to keep it. So be aware that in different parts of the world, there's also different service levels that are expected. So for example, in Japan, we try really hard to respond to something within 1 to 2 hours because the players there are so passionate, and if they feel like they're being ignored, they're going to go away and play a similar game or a competitive game. So, and this is sort of just an illustration as to why we think VIPs are really important. just anecdotally from our games, very very small percentage of players actually generate the most revenue for a game. So for a top grossing game, it's actually quite critical to take care of your VIPs. So you don't actually have to invest a lot in new users. You can continue to do that, but if you have players that already like your game, it's more important to do what you can to keep them. So retention is actually much more important than sort of bringing new users to a game. All right, so this is an example of, again, from Puzzle and Dragons, but this came up for one of my colleagues that's been playing the game for over 3 years. Basically, it's a unique character because he's played the game for 1,000 days, and this is something that only shows up, they were not expecting it, but because of that, he's going to keep playing the game, and it's really, really easy to implement little things like this to delight your players. Okay, so other things that you can do, we've done a lot of like giveaways and contests for our players. We've even invited a lot of our whales to dinner locally. To gather feedback. We share that with our developer partners, and they really value that. And for your top players, it makes them feel like they have a voice, and their feedback is really valued. So this is something that you may not be able to do, but certainly there are people that can help with that as well. All right, so in terms of customer care, figure out what are the most effective communication channels. It may be different depending on your market. So I've heard developers use Slack channels with their players, or they set up Facebook groups or whatever channel you think is most effective. Figure out what that is. It could be Twitter, it could be Facebook. And then finally, identify your top players, because these guys are really, really important. If your top player leaves, there's potential for them to bring the entire clan or guild with them, and you lose a huge chunk of your spenders. So it's quite critical to make sure you take care of your top players. What have you done for me lately? What that means is basically they're really, really loyal, but all it takes is one mess up, one screwed up thing, and they could be gone. So you have to kind of continuously try to keep them happy through online and offline things, and don't forget to be generous with them, because they really appreciate it. I know as a gamer, if I feel like a game is buggy and there's no way for me to get in touch with the developer about that, I get really frustrated and I'll just delete the app. So if you have a way for players to get in touch with you to share feedback, they'll really value that. And if you compensate them, hey, I'm really sorry for this bug, here's some really unique items or currency to kind of get you back into the game. All right, so the final point would be leverage partnerships. All right, so what do I mean by that? Making a game is really, really expensive. You guys all know that. Not only is there development or updates, you have to localize the game. That's artwork intensive. Support. That's not even counting marketing, so spending money on user acquisition and constantly refreshing creatives in your marketing campaigns, ASO, public relations. There's a ton of stuff. So for a lot of developers, that can be quite daunting. It's really hard to, even if you have one or two marketing guys on your team, you're competing with large established companies with tons of guys that have been doing this for years, right? So it's really, really challenging to do this alone. For that reason, I would encourage you guys to consider working with partners, not just because I'm working at a publisher, but I think publishers can actually add a lot of value. So add a lot of marketing muscle. We can actually front all of the marketing costs and absorb that risk for you. Platform relationships is pretty obvious. Geographic expertise we talked about. Most importantly, like publishers have experience, and you can leverage that to figure out what's the best way to position your game, what's the best way to launch it, and they can help with all of that. And the end of the line, the end of I guess the whole point I'm trying to make is publishers can help you scale. So you may have a successful game, and it could be generating healthy income for you, but how long is that going to last? Chances are, if you don't have a lot of resources, it will be tough to maintain that for years to come. And then when your game is on the decline, you're not going to have, you really need a hit for your next game, right? So the publisher can help you scale multiple times higher than you can, so that you have a lot more runway to do more things. All right, so some other ways that publishers can help out. How many of you guys have watched like House of Cards? Okay, so one of the things that boggles my mind is that every season they show Kevin Spacey just playing a random mobile game. I have no idea how they did that, but I think it's really, that's something that you can't really buy. We actually managed to achieve something similar in Japan. So we actually featured a few of our games in a popular drama in Japan. We were able to convince the director to write in a part, and basically one of the characters in the show is a PM. They came and filmed stuff in their office, and they just showed them playing our games. And that kind of thing is something that you may be able to figure out if you've got friends, but you just might not have the bandwidth to tackle it. So publishers can really help you to brainstorm positioning and ways to think outside the box in your marketing campaigns. All right. And so when you're looking at a publisher, these are what I think are the most important considerations. First of all, obviously, they're the business terms. That's a no-brainer. But in addition to that, what is the competency of the publisher, right? So if you're making a strategy game and you're talking to a publisher that does match 3 games, that's probably not a fit, right? So look at what they've done before. Are they particularly strong in a region, for example? So if you have no insight into Latin American market, maybe there's a player that a publisher that can help you out there. Do they have local presence? So in one thing I'll say about Asia, it's very, very important to do offline marketing because the cities are really, really crowded. So you see a lot of ads on TV, on billboards outside, public transportation. And for the large companies, ourselves included, we spend half of our marketing budget on what we call offline marketing. And that's not UA. It's basically outdoor, more traditional media and marketing channels. And it's really, really effective. So if you don't have local presence that can do that, you're really limiting what you can achieve on the marketing side. And finally, track record. Does a publisher have a history of success with similar games? Do they really know what they're doing? Right? And all of these ultimately kind of contribute to your overall feeling. So, I think the final consideration is basically, I mean, most of the time when I talk to publishers, I spoke to someone yesterday, and he kind of threw this out, and I was like, that totally, hits a nail on the head. Ultimately, game developers, I sense that they just want to really make cool games. And some may take an interest in marketing or other things, but really it's asking a lot to kind of do all of that yourself. So there are a lot of cases where partners can help with this effort. So just to kind of sum up, talk to people in the industry. If you've got other developers that have worked with publishers, ask them about that experience. Ask them about the business terms. You don't want to try to sign a publishing deal without knowing what you're potentially getting into. I shouldn't be saying this, but it helps to kind of know what other people have done. So yeah, definitely make sure that the publishers add value where you need it the most. So I would say like the alignment of those considerations that I showed before is really, really important. So if a publisher really believes in your game, make them put their money where their mouth is, right? So make them back that up. It could be a huge commitment. It could be a license fee, a MG, something like that that really shows that they really care about making your game a success. And finally, I would say there's sort of this other more subtle thing is whether or not they feel like a fit. So when you're talking to a publisher, do you really sense that this company really understands what you're trying to do with your game? If not, try to see what else is out there. Talk to other developers, other publishers. I get a lot of requests for help with mainland China because we're not publishing there. I'll happily refer them to mainland China publishers that I think are doing a really good job. So it's not a sort of dog eat dog world in terms of publishing. We're very friendly and we sort of help each other out. And I would say finally helps to be really upfront, as upfront as possible. So a lot of times you kind of you don't want there to be any misunderstanding or about what the plan will be for your game, right? So make sure that's all spelled out very clearly on paper before you sign anything. And so yeah, just to recap, make sure you know the markets and where the opportunities lie. Localize your game properly. Focus on the culture, not just the text. Have a really, really robust plan for events and updates for your game. Take care of your most important customers, and make sure you can lean on partners that can add value where you need it the most. That's pretty much it. Thank you.
Any questions?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I wanted to ask because you said about the cultural differences and making sure that they are tacked in when you make the game. Does it work both ways? If you, for example, have a game that's in Asia and it's developed by an Asian company, and you put it into the Western market, except for the localization, do you also have to take into consideration the graphic style, for example, and things like that?
Yes, that's a really good question, and you're exactly right. So if we are bringing a game from China, for example, to English-speaking territories, we have the team that actually will evaluate and make recommendations. So ultimately, you have to balance the amount of work that you put into localization versus getting the game out the door. So sometimes, it may not be practical to revamp all of the artwork if you've got hundreds of characters and, that you need to do. But you can actually put a lot more attention into other areas, like maybe just the NPCs that pop up during the first time user experience or something like that. The app icon, the description. So yeah, it's a balancing act. But yes, it works both ways, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your speech. Could you recommend some publishers, some good
Sure.
publishers?
Yeah, absolutely.
No, we have some experience from the past that we were using some publishers and our analytic tools were showing quite nice numbers, but numbers which we get from the publishers were very low. So most probably our statistics tools were wrong.
Okay.
But it will be good to find somebody really good.
Yeah, I would say that depends on what you're using for tracking, I guess. Usually there are some discrepancies, but it shouldn't be sizable.
It was very big difference.
Okay, yeah, that sounds kind of fishy to me. If you want, like, let me know which markets you're interested in, and I'm happy to recommend if it's something that we're not handling. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk to you separately. Yeah,
Thank you.
but there's a lot of publishers out there. Unfortunately, there's not a lot here. That's good for me, but not good for you guys, I guess.
Thank you.
So thank you for your speech. I have a question about difficulty. I mean, obviously you have to localize the game in Asian market, but what about, for example, the difficulty? Should it be different in there than, for example, in US and Europe, or?
Right. Good question. It depends on the game. So for strategy games, when you're trying to compete and promote PvP and clan wars and things like that, it's very important to keep the playing field level. And so one region cannot have an advantage over another. So yeah, you have to, if you do that, like, so there's some things that happen in Asia quite commonly is that players will actually download and play multiple versions of the same game. So we've got people in our office that'll play, that they'll download the Taiwanese version of the game because they heard that the percentage of gacha for this character is slightly higher or whatever. Like, people go to great extremes to achieve this competitive advantage. So for that reason, it's always better to kind of keep, in terms of a strategy game, to kind of keep things level. But for other games, in like, could be like, let's say a puzzle game, you may want to tweak the balancing and make it more challenging. So for hardcore territories where you're seeing people that are blazing through it really easily, you can probably tweak that difficulty up. But for if you hear or you see data that shows that your players are hitting a bottleneck in other territories, then you can sort of relax that, and that's going to be pretty, like, imperceptible to those players.
Right. Thank you.
Anybody? I guess we have no.
Oh, one more.
Okay.
Could you go back to the slide with the red button?
Which one?
With the red button.
With the red button. Okay.
Yes. Because I
Yes.
would like to thank you for localizing this presentation to Polish.
Yes.
This is not a simple red button because
Yeah, I know.
there are Polish labels.
Thanks.
And
Yeah, I put a lot of thought
thank
into
you for that.
Yeah, no, it wasn't an accident. So, thanks.
Thank you.
I have a question about monetization methods. If it differs in regions, for example, the methods of monetization, for example, one market is more willingly paying in-app purchases, and second is more focused on, for example, rewarded videos.
Right.
And the same if the monetization points in different moments, for example, one geography pays more frequently at the very beginning of the gameplay, and second wants to play to pay some in some
Okay.
other.
Yeah.
moments.
Good question. It really depends on the genre of the game. So I would say for strategy or mid-core games, in Asia, it's actually pretty much 100% in-app purchases. Most developers still have not come around on rewarded monetization. It's a little bit different from the West, where you give sort of players an option, right? They can spend or they can do stuff to grind and maybe not have to spend right away. I'd say for casual games, it's pretty standard through most of the world, a combination of both. Hopefully that answers your question. I think the other thing is for games, strategy games in Asia, they tend to have a much longer first-time user experience. So up to half an hour in some cases. It gets pretty crazy and frustrating, but they're really trying to show all the different like sort of complex features in the game in one go. Whereas I find that let's say Western games tend to space that out a little bit in terms of when they introduce those new features. So it depends on the genre, but also on the audience and what, you know, basically when you're testing, you should try to observe the behavior and see whether or not they're hitting a bottleneck or one of the things that we also look at, in addition to recording player videos and during beta tests, is also session times, session length as well, and that will give you more insight as to, you know, what parts of the game they're agreeing with and what parts they're not agreeing with.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Questions?
This is already really good because usually I get no questions. So thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.